Hello and welcome to Lit Illuminated. I'm Rebecca Beardsall and I'm thrilled to have you here with me today. This is a space for us to talk about books and the insights that come to us through the pages. I am excited about today's podcast. I am going to be talking about Louise Wallace's Ash. And this book comes from New Zealand, Aotearoa. I don't know if it's available in the US right now. I purchased mine from New Zealand. I read about it online, about many different people I follow that talk about New Zealand literature. And in some way, I love that the universe has brought to me another book that plays with form. And the article that I read that got me to buy this book in the first place was talking about how Wallace is a poet first, and then kind of dove into this prose writing. And so that it plays with form in that way as well. There's some poetic moments in here. And I think for me, there's some really interesting themes that she tackles, but also the methodology. And so again, like I said, I love how authors play with form and push against the standard of prose and the way that we can tell our stories differently. And so, for example, throughout she uses figures, and they're not pictures; they are words, but she calls them in there like a figure. Like figure 5 here is saying it's a checking in. So it says figure 5 checking in parentheses. And then it's a whole bunch of, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? In various different layers and lines in there. And it's in italics. And then the last statement, not in italic, says, and then they stop asking. And this is repeated. That checking in one again is also, I think, figure 10, figure 11. And throughout. And so the figures kind of add these extra elements. And in that form of the figures, the words all meld together. Their sentence structure is kind of like string of conscious in some way. There is punctuation, but it's like how the words just run together. There's no spacing in there as well. And so it kind of adds a beauty to it as well. There is a design. There is an element to it that would put it in that figure space. There's also the way that the words meld together is an indication of like what's happening. So another example is figure 9. It's called date night. Eli's PJs, Lucy's PJs, nappy, white, slippers. This is the cream if Lucy has a sore bum. And it continues on throughout the whole thing, like basically every element that needs to happen. And then to the date and beyond, right? So I just love the way that she uses these figures to advance the story, to advance the narrative. Another interesting thing that she uses throughout in the figures is the catastrophizing. And in that, there's questions that go over 2 pages, and there's multiples of these throughout. And at each one, it ends with, it could be talking about like, what are you worried about? And then at the end, it always ends with, can you comprehend the ocean, the world, the universe? So this broadening out of the big question, where do we fit in all of this? What's happening in the world? In addition, she uses these breaks of poetry to move us into the big events that happen within the book. And so one happens when a volcano erupts, and there's ash everywhere. At one point, we get there, and it looks like clouds, this kind of like how our brains try to understand what's happening, and we associate it with things we understand. It looks like clouds, and then it's like, oh wait, those aren't clouds. And then it moves into this memory space, this poem that kind of deals with memory. And then another big element, like a big event in the book, is her son going into the hospital. And so again, it ends abruptly in the regular prose, and then the next next segment is this beautiful poetry that kind of like pulls us into the next space. So in some way, it's like a palate cleanser that moves you from the intense moment to kind of like deep breath, get into this like understanding what is life, what is happening, and then like let's get us back into the story. So the very interesting thing about this for me is the content. She's talking about the additional pressures of women. There is, she's a young mother, or she's young children, and she is working, and she's a vet tech in this way, but she's also managing the house. Her husband doesn't seem super involved in this space. His mother tends to kind of step in and help a little. And there's also some issues of women within the workplace. There's another character, Kim, in this space, who is trying to get on this board with these vets. And basically they're like, well, she might have kids someday. So I don't know, we should put a clause in there that if that happens, then, we don't have to keep her on. And then like this whole, like, I don't think that's legal. And like this whole conversation that kind of goes on. And the character in here, tries to push against that and like working in this like man's world and what that means in the space of women. And then layer on top of that the volcano that happens. And in this, it mirrors the pandemic in many ways. They all have to go out with masks. They have to, like, the outside becomes dangerous in some way. There's a moment in here where people have bought all the toilet paper from the store. And at one point, I believe she's like, and this is how, we end, right? Like this is how the world ends, how we like fight each other in this space for things like toilet paper and resources and like that. But I think what's interesting about using a volcano and ash is the way that it covers everything. And it becomes dangerous to be out in the world, but that you need to go out in the world, or otherwise you're only within your own space, and in that becomes its own problem. And I think the other thing that she really addresses in here, that the volcano in some way takes us to a different level of understanding about it, is this additional burden that's put onto women in society. So, not only does she have to raise the children, but she's also, has to be in a career. And she also has to fight for that every single day because of how women are viewed in that space. And being a vet tech and having to go out to farms and work with farmers. And there's another like level of sexism there that she has to manage. And so in some ways, this ash on top of everything is another visual in it of the layers that get put on women, this additional layers from society that continue to get put on women, that they have to bear that burden as part of just living. And how it disrupts things when you recognize it, when you see it, when people start seeing it for what it is and know that it has to be removed and we have to work through that. It's more something that you have to do as a community. Like one person cannot remove all the ash that has fallen on a town. This is something that everyone has to kind of work through and recognize as well. And I think another thing that she uses in this space of what's happening is this concept of women in the space of good or bad and good girl or bitch. So there's a scenario that happens where she's out on a farm and a heifer has fallen and hurt itself, and the people have left it there to die. And she comes out from a call from a neighbor and is basically realizing that she has to euthanize this animal. And the owners didn't care. They didn't have a gun, so she had to inject the the heifer. And at one point, when the woman was walking away after she informed her that the heifer had to be put down, she called her a bitch, right? And there was this whole investigation on it, like in the way she handled it. And what was interesting to me is that she, at the very last thing of the book, and the last moment, is her reliving this moment with the heifer. So she's just been called a bitch by this woman, and she sits down next to the heifer, and she, you know, like strokes her neck, and like kind of she said that she's already given up her fight, and can just euthanize her without kind of struggling, and that she's just saying, "Good girl," I said, as though that should mean anything and be any comfort at the end. Just the two of us alone in the paddock's wide silence, swamped in gray, the heifer's fading breaths like waves, then nothing. "You're a good girl," I said. And oh, so powerful. The contradictions that Wallace addresses in this space about how women are perceived, what our roles are within society, how that gets complicated, and this idea of being that comfort in that space, and just recognizing the life that it was, and now it's gone. And I think that's the other thing that she plays within here, is the idea of like love and mothering, and how that gets used and abused by other people, and that it is a way that women walk through the world, but it often becomes what others expect from them all the time. And then also this space of when that is really for your children, or when you have to also be that for others. And it's like that's this really gray line that kind of gets pulled and pushed through, especially women in careers, and what that means, and how you work through that space. And at one point, so this other woman that was fighting for this space within the board, and with the other vets, the main character here was in the process of helping her, but then her son got sick, and like that became her whole world, and just kind of trying to exist in that space. And it was heartbreaking that eventually that woman was basically, well, thanks for nothing. Like, basically, you didn't lift me up, you didn't help me through this. But she was going through her own crisis. Not only was she having her own crisis with her child, the world was in chaos because of the ash. And so I think this is where that whole like kind of mothering space comes in. And it's like, how much can you do? How much can you continue to do when you also have to take care of yourself and your own family to also take care of others? And there's this scene here when I think, there's a speech going on, and another young tech comes to her and says, "I know it's because people like you who have fought against the system again and again. People like you." I stay silent, leaving Reuben dangling. I'll let all his words rush past. Here to serve, Reuben, here to serve. And again, it's how do we work into that space, right? This recognition of what happened and what took place, and how this woman and what she's done to continue to push and rally against what's happening to her, in the end helps others, but it doesn't actually help her. And the other way that she brings this about is that in the footnotes, she's telling this other story of this like pioneer woman, and again, talking about the struggles, the way that she's viewed by her husband in this space, then the volcanic in that space as well. And when I was finished the book and I kind of got to the end, I realized that she used different sources. She said the footer fable draws from Plath, from Charlotte Wood, and a bunch of others. And I was like, this is also what I've been talking about, the way that writers, are in conversation with other writers. And I just love that she did that here too, that this is a way to showcase and highlight the real way that we continue as writers and as readers to be in conversations with books that are around us. And that even picking this up in my last podcast I did on Lit Illuminated was about Sylvia Plath, and then to see it here, there's like all these beautiful connections. And it is just another highlight that what I've been saying all along is that we are in constant conversation with other books, and in that, other authors and other readers. And it's just beautiful. I love it so much. So that made me really happy that this additional thing that she added to the narrative itself as a footnote that kind of took us a different way, a different story that was kind of paralleling this story, was borrowed and like used and like captured the words of other writers. Just fabulous. And then finally, I want to just note the fact that she used a volcano. This could have been anything. She could have even used COVID, right? Like a lot of this was similar to the kind of COVID aspects of like lockdown, of having to stay inside, wear a mask. People had to switch the way they were working, and people that weren't used to using email had to start using email or technology. It was all of that in here. It was a volcano. And I think what's so interesting about that too is how so much of this is a conversation about women and men and the roles that they play or that they inflict on each other. And to use a volcano, which is also seen as phallic, that was the catastrophe that she used to be the catalyst for not only her to gain her strength and her understanding of self, and it was also what brought about the illness of her child that kind of brought her and her family to reassess not only what was happening with them, but their relationship and how they were walking through the world. And so, like, there's elements here that using this moment to have her look at how the world has been treating her and the women around her, and also, in some way, her diving deep into herself to know who she is and where she sits in this space and how she wants to move forward and what her role is in that space. And so I said this earlier, I think it was another beautiful way to talk about how society and the demands that get put on us become these layers, and that when we're rushing around in the world and in our day, we just keep kind of pushing through it and moving through it. And if you take the time to think about every task you have to do, every request that's brought upon you, every like ask that comes, in addition to just also doing what you want to do, recognizing yourself and giving yourself time to breathe and reflect and live. Everything is a layer on a layer on a layer on a layer, and it just kind of coats the world around you. And it's not until you recognize that and can start to think about ways to work through that, or to at least in some way acknowledging it is the first way to push through it. Anyway, this was a beautiful novel. I really enjoyed it. Ash by Louise Wallace. This is an Aotearoa New Zealand author, and it was beautiful. I loved it. Again, super excited that it played with form and it played with layering of narratives with the footnotes, and then also using the figures as a way to bring the story to you in different ways. Oh, and the other thing I don't want to forget that I also loved is that she used the slash. In poetry, when you're writing poetry that might be in verse and you're just putting it in line, that when when the line actually breaks, you're showing the break by putting a slash in there. And so what she did here is that in the white space or in between paragraphs or segments, she used a slash, which I thought was beautiful. It's kind of like a way to know that it's a break, like line break. And so often in that space, right, you see like the 3 asterisks or you just see white space. But there was something about using the break slash that I also was like, this is another way to bring poetry into this space and the way that we think about language as a whole. So thank you again for joining me. I hope you can get your hands on Ash. It's beautiful and insightful. I really took my time and savored this because I think it was so beautifully written. And again, just love that it played with form and that it continued the conversation with other writers. Thanks. Until the next time.